News Service Daily Newscast for February the 6th, 2020. I'm Mike Clifford. White House hopeful Joe Biden called his poor performance in the Democrats' first 2020 leadership vote in Iowa's caucuses a gut punch, that from the BBC. They report Biden's come in fourth according to incomplete results. Biden said, quote, "I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This isn't the first time in my life I've been knocked down." The BBC adds, with most of the results declared in Monday's glitch-plagued caucuses, Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders are neck and neck. New Hampshire is the next state to vote on February 11th. Meantime, our Mike Bowen reports Iowa's prominent role in the presidential nominating process is now being questioned after this week's delays and technical issues.
Iowa has long held one of the most closely watched events in the election cycle with its caucuses, as the first vote's taken every 4 years. But with this year's delayed results, those who want Iowa to switch to a primary election and later on the calendar amplified their calls. Veronica Fowler with the ACLU of Iowa says her organization would at least like to see more improvements for people who can't take part.
We have concerns about the current format because it's very difficult for a wide variety of marginalized people and many others to actually participate.
Fowler says there are access issues for people with disabilities, older people who can't travel, and for anyone who works in the evening. The Iowa Democratic Party said it did take steps this year to make the event easier for people with disabilities, including an online form for voters to make accommodation requests.
An effort to increase the minimum wage for Ohio workers is a step closer to the November ballot. Here's Mary Sherman.
On Wednesday, the Ohio Ballot Board certified the language for the proposed amendment brought forth by Ohioans for raising the wage. James Hayes with that coalition says the measure mirrors the 2006 initiative that indexed wage increases to inflation.
We would be voting to raise wages to $13 by 2025. That rate would be connected to inflation, so wages would continue to rise with the cost of living year after year, as it has been thus far, but we would just have a higher floor to begin with.
The current minimum wage is $8.70 an hour. The coalition needs to collect about 450,000 certified signatures by July 1st to put the measure before voters in November. This story was produced in association with Media in the Public Interest and funded in part by the George Gunn Foundation.
Currently, an Ohioan working full-time for minimum wage is paid just over $18,000 a year. According to research from Policy Matters Ohio, that would leave a full-time worker with a family of three about $3,000 below the poverty line. This is PNS. Kentucky lawmakers considering a bill that would prevent seriously mentally ill defendants from receiving the death penalty.
A handful of other states, including Ohio, Virginia, and Indiana, recently have pushed similar legislation. Patrick Delahanty of the Kentucky Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty says the bill does not exclude everyone with some form of mental illness from capital punishment, only those with severe disorders such as schizophrenia.
And so it doesn't seem fair in a system of justice that seeks to punish someone and also show people the difference between good and bad.
He says the bill is similar to a Kentucky law passed in the early 1990s that bars people deemed to be mentally disabled from being executed. I'm Nadia Ramlagan.
The National Alliance on Mental Illness and other groups have publicly stated their opposition to executing people with serious mental health issues. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in southwestern South Dakota will be the site of a $100 million solar energy generation project. Roz Brown reports for PNS.
The state's Public Utilities Commission approved the Lookout Solar Park this week for property about 80 miles from Rapid City. To build the state's first large-scale solar facility, a German company will lease the land from the Rapp family. Lynn Rapp is a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe who has represented the family and hopes the historic project will be an example for other reservations.
And then we know that when $1 is spent, it turns over 7 times in the communities where it is used. And our reservation towns are desperate for cash.
The lease agreement is the first of its kind for the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
And finally, our Eric Galatis tells us a coalition of conservation groups are taking the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to court over its proposal to postpone phasing out winter feeding at the Jackson Hole National Elk Refuge.
Recent winters have seen more than 8,000 elk crowded on refuge feed lines for alfalfa pellets provided by the agency. Connie Wilbert with the Sierra Club's Wyoming chapter, one of the groups joining the lawsuit, says the time for Fish and Wildlife to take steps to prevent the potentially catastrophic spread of disease is now.
The Fish and Wildlife Service needs to start phasing out feeding on the elk refuge now, before the refuge becomes infected with chronic wasting disease.
Wildlife officials detected chronic wasting disease in Jackson Hole in 2018, and biologists say it's just a matter of time before it reaches elk drawn to easy winter food supplies. Wyoming livestock producers and hunters have urged Fish and Wildlife to keep the winter program in place to keep elk away from livestock grazing on public lands.
Data collected by state agencies and NGOs show there is enough natural food to sustain the region's elk and other big game over the winter. I'm Mike Clifford for Public News Service. We are member and we are listener supported. We're online at publicnewsservice.org.